Welcome to this call, our Dapr community call on November 29th. My name is Mark Fussell. I'm your host for today, and I'm one of the maintainers on the Dapr project repo. We have a fun agenda for you today. We have Ryan and Aaron who are going to be talking about Project Radius, which was recently announced from Microsoft, and they're going to talk about how it fits in, particularly with Dapr, which is why we invited them here today, and how Radius and Dapr play well together. After that, we'll have Elena and Cassie dive in to talk a bit about improvements with the Dapr error codes for our Dapr dev experience. And then Mark will touch on an upcoming Dapr Day that will be happening in February next year. Super exciting. He'll dive into a bit of community show and tell, and then we'll have any time for questions at the end. But as we go through this, always feel free to post questions in the chat window. So it's good to hear about your thoughts. So with that, I will stop sharing. And I will hand it over to you, Aaron, to take over.
Thank you, Mark. Let me get my slides up on the screen for you. All right, get that back over here, and I'll pull the chat up as well. So feel free to ask questions along the way. Actually, I'll do intros and everything, but we actually have a lot of the Radius team here today. So please, if you have questions, if I'm talking about something, or in a little bit when Ryan Nowak's going to be demoing kind of what we're going to be our topic today, please just throw questions in the chat. We always like to make these super interactive. But yeah, it's actually great to be back. It's been a few months, if not maybe a few years, since I was super active in the Dapr community and in the community calls. I had to pull my Dapr swag out of the closet because a little bit about Radius is a lot of the background of kind of how Dapr was kind of got off the ground. And Radius now is, we're actually coming from a team in Microsoft called the Azure Incubations team. So if you've ever worked with Kada or hopefully Dapr or Copa or Radius, we seed a lot of kind of these ideas and different projects out and donate them into the community, such as like the CNCF in the case for most, and in the process for Radius as well. So we have been, super active. I used to be a docs maintainer, and I'm still very active over in the docs repo, and still keep up to date with a lot of the Dapr team. So super, super excited to be back. And so there might be a couple familiar faces. But today's topic is going to be kind of on the latest project that we've been working on now for the past few years, which is going to be Radius. Now, Radius is actually picking up where kind of Dapr, where Dapr solved a lot of problems in microservice development around kind of that portable abstraction through its building blocks and through like those microservice and building block best practices, and now even with what the exciting updates of like resiliency and especially workflows now as well. There's still a lot of things that make microservice development difficult, which includes apps are actually more than just a single microservice. They're going to be complex architectures of microservices with Dapr sidecars. They're going to be Dapr building blocks. They're going to be cloud infrastructure. They're going to be test and canary and pre-prod and local development. And so no matter like kind of the different environments kind of laterally, and then the different stages kind of vertically, things balloon pretty quickly. And then once you get that deployed, how do you actually know what the app is and troubleshoot it and say, oh, if there's an issue with this particular like Dapr pub sub or service bus, how do I know what the upstream and downstream dependencies are, so I kind of know what the blast radius is of that particular resource? And then as like Dapr gave us a lot of the tools and the way to write your code to go from different platforms such as local development to Azure to AWS to on-premises hosted environments. Like, how do we make sure that there's a common experience, so you're not using tooling that's cloud specific for one environment and different tooling for another? And now if you have like requirements that your app needs to run in multiple places, how do you make sure you're not running like 10 different sets of pipelines and tooling? And along the way, how do you make sure that you follow all of those best practices and you don't accidentally leave open resources to the public, or how do you make sure you use the best technologies such as managed identities? So a lot of problems that we wanted to solve. And well, for portability and that abstraction, you might be saying, well, isn't that Kubernetes? And the answer is yes, we love Kubernetes. And you'll see in a little bit how with Radius, you actually can run that on Kubernetes right next to your Dapr installation. But kind of the one thing that we've been saying we think with Radius is cloud native apps are more than just Kubernetes. Kubernetes is just that one layer that makes up the app, where really you're also talking Helm charts and you're talking your infrastructure as code, hopefully, such as Bicep, Terraform, Pulumi, all the different things there. Or there's going to be all that glue that brings everything together, such as PowerShell, Bash, GitHub Actions, and just to name a few. So really the landscape of what makes up that cloud native app is so much more than just the Kubernetes runtime and orchestrator there. Now with describing these applications, there's a lot of different layers. Just one quick example that you might write an ARM JSON specification, and this could be Terraform or Bicep. Then you have to go write some script to go actually apply this into your Azure subscription. Then you have to go write your Helm charts and parameterize everything. Then you have to go write some additional automation on top of that. So it's just, there's multiple layers here. And so very often developers and operators can find it difficult to not only get it up and running, but then also maintain it after long periods of time. And once you figure all of this out and write even more, all that you're left with is just flat lists of resources. So now if you open up the Azure portal, the AWS console, different things, there's going to be just long lists of infrastructure that you have to go in and try and keep multiple tabs open to say, okay, what's in my resource group? What's inside of my cluster? What's inside of this? It makes it hard to just know what the app actually is. So that's where Radius comes in and what we're going to be talking about today. And you'll see the demo from Ryan. It's a new cloud native application platform that we built to run on any cloud and especially run really well with Dapr. You'll kind of see throughout the demo and an example here how we built this to just fit in seamlessly, where Dapr gives your code that portability with that programming model. And then Radius comes in with the platform and offers the application model. So with Radius, we're offering a couple things. First is we have a defined separation of concerns between developers and operators. We're really focused in on those platform engineering teams that are building platforms so that way they can describe their application. So we're actually introducing the concept of an application, like an actual application resource. And we have the environment, the actual environment resource that operators use. Another thing that we're adding is something called recipes, and we'll be demoing this, where developers can say, I need a Dapr state store. So they state, my application needs a state store and a pub sub broker and a secret store, all of the things that they care about. And then the operator, through the recipe, can say, anytime a state store is created, deploy this infrastructure. If we're on Azure, this might be an Azure cache for Redis. If we're on AWS, it might be DynamoDB. Operators have full control over that backing infrastructure. And just like before, we were seeing the applications today are just flat lists of resources. Radius introduces an application graph, meaning once your application is deployed into your environment, into the cloud or locally running, you can actually query that application and say, using our app graph APIs, what resources are in my app? What is the state of my application? Like, what connections does this container have to other things? You can start to actually reason about what the application is. And then in the future, we hope to have rich visualizations. But today you'll see some CLI tooling we built around this. And throughout it all, cloud neutral. You can, just like Dapr building blocks and components, you can swap out those components. With Radius, you just swap out those recipes, swap out the resources. That way, one common app definition deployed to multiple environments. So you'll see that Radius fits in where you have your cloud native apps, and you'll see that Dapr is up there. You can have Dapr within your apps, and then you can use Radius to describe, deploy, and manage your app across any cloud or edge infrastructure. And then there was a question in the chat about GCP. Today we offer Azure and AWS. GCP is higher up on our roadmap to add GCP support as well. I'm doing some testing with some Terraform on that. So I'll walk through just a quick diagram example, and then I'll kick it over to Ryan for the demo. let's say that you have a pretty basic application, and in Radius, this is actually a resource that you get to model. It might have a front end and back end container, the internet facing gateway, and then it might have a Dapr state store and a Redis cache. So when you run locally as part of your local development loop, you might be using a Redis container and then running on a lightweight K3s cluster running on your local machine. But then without any change to the application, you just deploy it to a different environment, such as one running in Azure, where it's using Azure Cache for Redis and Azure SQL DB running on AKS. And then again, no change to the application. You can deploy it to AWS and use MemoryDB, DynamoDB running on EKS. So what you end up getting is a platform where you describe your app, mixing and matching the resources you need, including Dapr. You have your environment running on any of our supported clouds using recipes, and they bind together at deploy time. So that's a lot of quick diagrams. I do want to make sure that the demo is the star of the show, so I'll pass it over to Ryan Nowak, who actually walk us through what a Radius application looks like with Dapr.
Hey, thanks everyone. I cannot share my screen while another participant is sharing. Okay.
Cool. There you go. I just stopped sharing.
Thanks. Aaron, can you see that?
Yep, coming through for me.
Cool. So I'm Ryan, by the way. I think a lot of you probably know me. Some of you probably don't. I was involved in Dapr somewhat early on. And to prove it, I've got my Dapr swag layered over top of my Radius swag to represent what we're doing today. And I'm going to be showing you a demo of using Dapr and Radius together. Since we're some of the folks who worked on Dapr pretty early, we're pretty passionate about it. We think that these things go super well together. And just to kind of think about it, like Dapr helps you write good applications. It helps you work with cloud resources and external dependencies and write good, resilient microservices kinds of applications. Radius is much more on the deployment and configuration side. So don't think about us as changing the way your applications behave or changing the way you write code. We kind of want to be the glue that glues together all the things that you need, if you want to think about us that way. And so I'm just going to get into the demo. What I'm going to describe is I've got a really simple application here that's using Dapr. I'm going to use Helm to deploy this on a local Kubernetes cluster, and then I'm going to do the same in the cloud. And we'll see how Radius helps me move this application and its configuration across dev to staging to different clouds and that sort of thing. And so just introducing the application, I've got a Docker file here. There's nothing interesting in this Docker file. The only reason I'm showing you this is to kind of just explain where we are in the workflow. So Radius doesn't care how you build and package and publish your applications. However you're doing that today is fine. We work with Kubernetes and containers today, which is something you might already be using if you're here. We'll probably do some other things in the future if Radius is a success, but that's kind of where we are right now, is bring your containerized application. The other thing that I will show you before we kind of get started with Radius is I've got some code that I've already written that's using Dapr. So this is a to-do application. It's going to use a Dapr state store it's going to use a Dapr state store as its store for my to-do items. And so you can see that I've already written the code. And again, reminder, like there isn't really a library or SDKs to use with Radius. We're not trying to change the way you write code or the way you think about building applications. Whatever architectural paradigms you're using, whatever dependencies you have, whatever way you write code and deal with configuration is something we want to support. So you shouldn't have to rethink things you're doing in your applications to adopt something like Radius. Now, let's talk about how I deploy this and how I set this up. And to kind of position us, like imagine that I'm a developer. I'm somewhat comfortable with Kubernetes. I'm not an expert. I'm more at the level of writing application code and thinking about business problems. And I like technology like Dapr because it's pragmatic and practical for me. But I'm not an expert in a bunch of things that I need to do. I'm not an expert in creating cloud resources. I'm not an expert in managing production environments. And on the journey that we're going to kind of go on here, we're going to think about how I can move from a dev environment where I'm going to try my application with real dependencies. So I'm going to have Dapr installed there and run, with a real state store. And then I'm going to take that application and I'm going to move to the cloud, and I'm going to do that without changing anything or managing the configuration of any of those resources myself. I'm going to rely on some other people to do that. And so let's get started with this. So I've got a Helm chart here. And this is just, again, we're doing a really simple thing that I think a lot of us have seen or done before. I've got Dapr enabled, and I've just got the app ID of web app for this. I mentioned it's a to-do application. I'm going to use a Dapr state store here. And I could think about how I want to create my Redis in this test environment, my state store in this test environment. We're going to be using Redis, by the way. I could go follow a tutorial and deploy Redis into the cluster. I could have somebody else figure it out for me. I could use a Helm chart. I could do a bunch of things. Radius introduces this concept called recipes. And what recipes are meant to do is when you need a technology like a Dapr state store or a Redis cache, Radius is going to look in the environment that you're deploying to and say, do I have a recipe for a Dapr state store? Do I have a recipe for MongoDB or whatever technology you're using? I think one of the things we're trying to help with in Radius is all the technologies that you need that are outside of Kubernetes and helping you manage and connect to those technologies. And so it's really good if you're using Dapr because we can help manage the configuration of your Dapr components as well as the resources that those components are going to be leveraging. I think Radius is also really good for all the things that you're not using Dapr for today. So if there's other cloud resources you need to connect to, if there's SaaS accounts and other things you want to work with, we're trying to be the glue for all that stuff. And so I'm going to use a recipe. Now, using Helm and Kubernetes to interact with Radius is just one of the ways we could do it. There's some other ways to do it. I think this is probably most relevant for people that are already on Dapr. And I've defined a CRD here. I'll just uncomment that. And I'm going to use a recipe. I'm going to call the resulting object DB. And then what I'm saying in here is I'm saying I want to create a Dapr state store. This is basically a Radius way of saying create a Dapr state store. There's a bunch of different technologies that we support here that we can do with recipes. And that includes Dapr's building blocks, as well as things that are outside of Dapr, like SQL Server or Redis. So if you have use cases where you need to talk to cloud services that aren't part of Dapr, we can help with that too. So then when I deploy this Helm chart, it's going to use the recipe to create my Dapr state store. And it's going to find whatever recipe is in my environment and use that. Some of the other things that I might want to do here is I might want to kind of enable Radius for this application and say that I'm going to connect to it. And this should hopefully feel familiar to these folks. I'm going to add some annotations here. One that I'm going to say is radapp.io/enable. So this is me enabling Radius for this deployment. If I don't say it's enabled, then Radius just isn't going to look at it. We're not going to do anything. The other thing that I want to do is I'm going to declare a connection. And I'll explain what this means in just a sec. So radapp.io connection. I'm going to give that connection a name. In this case, the connection is going to be called state store because that's what I expected in the app. And I'm going to connect that to the result of this recipe. Now, the thing for Dapr is I think declaring connections doesn't do a ton for Dapr because Dapr is already pretty simple. But if you imagine that we had another technology in here like MongoDB or SQL Server, what this connection would do is it would inject settings into the application that you need to connect to it. So things like a connection string for SQL Server, a URL for MongoDB, whatever is relevant for the technology you're using. I think for Dapr, it's pretty simple, so there's not a lot that we do. The other thing that this connection is going to do is it's going to remember the fact that this component is talking to that component. And so that'll be useful later when we look at something called the application graph. We can reason about what we deployed, what Radius created for you, and kind of what the architecture is of the application. So without further ado, I'm ready to deploy this. I've just got a little script here because without it, I would forget how to use Helm. And this is just doing a Helm deploy. It's not doing anything really special. So you can see that that's been deployed to my Kubernetes cluster. I'm inside of a code space. And I've just got a cluster running here inside the code space. And I've just got like Radius and Dapr installed on it. I haven't really done much else. The next thing that I want to do is let's check if everything worked. So we'll say kubectl get all, and we'll look at the Dapr demo namespace is the one that I'm using for this. And so you can see that, well, we got our web app pod. You can see that my recipes status is ready. And then if we look kind of carefully, you can see that we've got a Dapr state store pod here. And what this actually is that the recipe in the environment spun up Redis for me and then built the Dapr component manifest. So I didn't have to figure out how to build the Dapr component manifest. And so we can just check this out. Let's verify that it's working. I've got another script here to run a port forward again, just because I would be helpless. I would be totally unable to understand what's happening. What's going on here? It popped a browser tab for me. You're seeing a port forward to a container inside of a Kubernetes cluster, inside of a code space, inside of a VM, inside of the cloud. So there's many layers of virtualization happening here. You can see that we understood inside the app that connection. This is just a page that we used to talk about Radius, by the way. You can see the settings here that get injected as a result of that connection. And this one, we're just telling you the Dapr state store name. For another technology that isn't Dapr, this would probably be more relevant to you. And then we can test out the to-do list. So I'll try this out. You can see that I've tried it out before and it looks like it worked. So I think that that's going pretty well. I'll just go ahead and get my terminal back here. So we were able to deploy the application, and that's kind of cool in my testing environment. We talked about the application graph, and I've got another script for this. This is actually running a Radius command to output the application graph. And let's make it a little bit real what happened. So when I deployed this Helm chart, Radius processed that recipe. It then took the results of that recipe, injected it into my deployment. And you can see here kind of what we understood about the app. So we've got this application called Dapr Demo. It's got a web app container. That web app container has got a connection to the Dapr state store. And then you can see this resources section. You can think of that like, what did Radius do on your behalf? So in this case, we used Helm to interact with Radius. So we just kind of remembered it like, hey, this is the deployment you created. We're cataloging it as part of this container. If we look at the Dapr state store, you can see that the catalog is a little bit more extensive. So like, you can kind of think about this like going from abstraction to physical resources, right? Logically, this is your Dapr state store. What's powering that Dapr state store? Well, it's this Kubernetes deployment running Redis. It's this Kubernetes service that's going to load balance to Redis, and it's the Dapr component that was created by Radius. And so even this kind of demo local development scenario, the recipe that comes with Radius can self-host some of these technologies. So that's kind of cool. But let's think about what might happen when we move to the cloud, right? If I'm not an ops expert, like I said, I might have to go file a ticket for somebody or kind of ask them like, hey, can you create a Dapr state store for me in this environment? Can you tell me where to deploy the app? And I think for a lot of folks, that can be kind of a painful process where there's a lot of troubleshooting required and back and forth and ticketing and requests, especially if you're on a big team where there's a lot of governance in the organization. We can use recipes in those environments to deploy our app. And so I've actually got 3 environments set up here. I've got the one that I've been using inside the code space. I've got an AKS cluster in Azure. I've got an EKS cluster in AWS. And in the future, maybe I'll have a 4th environment in a 3rd cloud. But for now, I've just got those 2. And the key is that I would be relying on whoever's responsible for ops to configure those environments in the right way. So if you sort of put on your platform engineering hat, the person who configures those environments could decide, hey, you know what? When we create state stores, we want to use DynamoDB. Or when we create a state store in Europe, we want to use a smaller instance of Redis because we have fewer customers there. And the people that are really experts on operations and cloud resources can make sure that, first of all, that the set of resources that they want to support are the set of resources that get created. And second of all, that those are created in the right way. So I'm just going to go ahead and deploy the app the same way, and I'll do it to both Azure and AWS. So I've got 3 Kubernetes contexts here. This is just a Helm deploy to 3 different places. So I'll do prod AWS. Now at this point, you're going to realize that I'm cheating because the revision number is going to make it clear that I'm cheating. So like this app is already deployed in these environments. I'm just kind of running it again to prove that it works. And I don't know what AWS's problem is. There it goes. AWS is kind of slow. The reason why I'm cheating in the demo is that it wouldn't be a very interesting demo if we had to sit here for 20 minutes while AWS creates a Redis cache, or Azure. I think we might be a little bit slower. So there, I've deployed the app just using Helm to AWS and Azure. And I'm not going to show you the app because it would kind of look the same. But we can think about the graph and sort of talk about what happened by looking at that. So I'll bring up my app graph command, and we'll do Azure first and then AWS. And again, this is just running a radius command. We're talking to radius in that cluster and saying, hey, what do you have, right? And this should look a lot like the picture we saw before. So we have the demo container here. That looks the same. We have the connection to the Dapr State Store. And you can see that our Dapr State Store is different. So we know that here's the Dapr component for it. I could look that up in Kubernetes if I wanted to. But you can see that we've got a cloud Microsoft cache.redis. And if I wanted to, I could go to the portal and see the exact one. And part of the reason why we hope that this is valuable is if you've ever been in a position where you've been like, hey, what apps are going to go down if we shut off this database? Or like, hey, there's an outage, what apps are impacted? Or if you're on the developer side of the house, like, hey, my app is misbehaving. How do I find the cloud resource that I'm using? This is the kind of thing that we want to help you with. A lot of the time, people need to troubleshoot and support apps, don't know the architecture of the app. And so we want to give everybody a shared picture. Right now, this is just text. We want to do some other things with it in the future. It's also an API. So we hope that this gets baked into other tools, incorporated into other experiences. You might find something you want to build with it. And so here's the output for AWS. And you can see that for AWS, we got different services. We got an AWS MemoryDB cluster and subnet group, which is one of a couple ways to run on AWS. And so you can see how we can swap different hosting models. Since this is a Dapr State Store, we could swap different technologies. And I didn't have to change the app. I think that's something that Dapr already provides with the separation between the apps and the components. The cool thing here is I can dynamically manage those components. The people who are responsible for platform engineering or IT or ops or whatever you call it can configure the recipes the way that they want. And then the process for me is on demand when I need to upgrade an application or deploy something new. So that's kind of what this looks like from a developer point of view. I could move across clouds and different environments without having to change my code or learn how to create resources in those different environments. Let's talk about the experience from the operations side and what recipes look like. And so to kind of give a clue at what recipes look like, I'll do a rad recipe list. And I'm going to do this in we'll just do this in the Azure environment to kind of give you a flavor. And so you can see that I've got 2 recipes registered here. You don't need to understand everything you're seeing, but just to get the flavor, I've got a recipe for Redis cache. I've got a recipe for State Store. And so if you're a platform engineer, you're really kind of enforcing like these are the set of technologies that you can use. Developers can't use recipes to create something that there's no recipe for. So if you control the environment, you get to say what gets used and how it gets created. Second of all, these templates come from an OCI registry. So you don't need to share them with developers. You can control them and version them independently of the developers doing their work and thinking about their applications. To get a sense of what these recipes look like, and again, we're talking about the platform engineering point of view, the recipe for a recipe is basically 3 things. One, you're going to get some data from Radius. So in this case, it's like, oh, and I'm showing Redis, and I meant to show Dapr State Store. You're going to get some data from Radius. That's where we tell you information like what network to use, and other kinds of where to send diagnostics, other kinds of operational stuff that you don't want to hard code in the recipe because it varies per environment you go to. The second thing that you're going to do is create whatever resources you need to create. In this case, the recipe creates the Redis cache on Azure, and it also creates a Dapr component manifest. So we're kind of putting all the Dapr configuration in the recipe. Because we created the cloud resource here, we know how to configure Dapr as well. And then the third thing, and this doesn't really apply that much to Dapr case, is you're going to give Radius some information about what you did so that the app can help connect to it. So this is really you're telling us what you did so that we can make a record of it. And so that's an example of a recipe for Azure for a Dapr State Store using Redis. If we wanted to look at something else, one of the things that we heard a lot is we heard that a lot of folks have existing Terraform, especially in the platform engineering space. And there's a variety of kind of opinions about Terraform these days, but we thought it was pretty important that people could use their existing Terraform. And so here's an example of a recipe. This is not a Dapr one, it's just a Redis cache one. And you can see that I'm using a module from the public module gallery to kind of turn this public module into a recipe. And so that's a way that I can take my existing code, and I'm really just kind of mapping inputs and outputs. I can use my existing infrastructure as code as recipes pretty easily inside of Radius. And so I think if you're thinking about this from a platform engineering point of view, we're kind of unopinionated about what tools to use. Right now, we support Bicep and Terraform for recipes. We're going to do more in the future. It's going to be driven by what the community has interest in using. I wouldn't think about Radius as a replacement for these technologies. It's probably better to think about us as an orchestrator for these technologies. So we're not going to go do a better job at being Terraform than Terraform, or do a better job at being CloudFormation than CloudFormation does, to just make a couple of examples. So that's a pretty quick overview. I think I want to show you one more thing and then kind of yield my time. The other thing that we're doing, and this is an incomplete example, we're also, if this is the kind of thing that interests you, we're also building an abstraction over Kubernetes. And I think folks are kind of divided whether they really like the Kubernetes world and want to continue to live in that world, or whether you want to go somewhere else. What we're trying to do with this is we're trying to give developers a way to interact with the cloud that's kind of at their level of abstraction. So there's probably a lot of things in Kubernetes that you don't understand very deeply if you're a developer. We're trying to build an abstraction that does two things. It should isolate developers from a lot of the operational complexity. And then second of all, if Radius is a success, we're going to go other places. So there'd be a way to describe your application that could go to both Kubernetes and to serverless platforms as well. That's something we're working on. I think it's kind of experimental right now. You might want to check it out, give us feedback if that's the kind of thing that you're interested in. Again, there's a couple different ways for you to do Radius. You could either use Helm or Kubernetes Manifest, whatever you're doing today, or you could kind of check out the thing that we're doing with building an abstraction, which is pretty new. So that's an overview. I'm going to hand it off to Reshma, and then I think some of the team are here. We'll make sure to answer people's questions in the chat.
That was a super cool overview of Ryan. Are you? Did you say you can hand it to someone else? Can do another demo, or is it you finished with the demo?
Reshma was going to have a couple more slides. Is she around? Have I lost Reshma?
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Not yet.
Well, no, we can see not yours. No, we can't see your screen yet. We see.
Okay.
I mean, if you're having trouble, Aaron could just share the slides again, and you could talk over them.
Yeah, I think that works.
Yep. 1 second.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'm just going to quickly go over the links and forums where people can participate and engage on Radius. First up is the documentation. You can find the product documentation at docs.radapp.io. This is where you can find getting started guides, tutorials, how-to guides, and also some great concept docs, which gives you context on why the project exists, what problem space we are trying to solve. And those are great resources to get some background on the project. And then there's some reference materials as well on the schemas, the API specification, which will give you more context on and nitty-gritty details on the Radius resource model, etc. So the second link here is the GitHub project. This is where the source code resides. So feel free to check out the source. And if you have issues getting started with Radius, log bugs, and then suggest new features that you would like to see in Radius. We also welcome contributions. So there's been some contributions both on the documentation and also on the functionality side. So we are here to help you navigate through the code base. And if you have any friction with the contribution, please let us know. We are here to help. And then please engage with us on Discord if you want to engage with us one-on-one, or if you need help troubleshooting issues. So these are some useful links, and I'm also going to share these links in the chat so that people can have these resources with them if they're interested to participate with Radius.
Yeah, post them in the chat. That's good. So going to the documentation, is there a getting started guide there? Is that where to go?
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a really good, the demo that I showed you actually was all new for this for this event. There's a tutorial that kind of follows the same path as what you saw in the demo. It doesn't use Dapr, but there's also some content that does have Dapr in it as well.
Excellent. Right. Well, let's kind of open it up for any questions that people might have. I don't know, Mauricio, do you have any questions on these things about the recipes? I know you're asking about the recipe. Did you get your question answered about what those look like?
I have so many questions now. I have way much more questions than I had before. I don't even know where to start, to be honest. So I kind of like understand the recipes gets defined with bicep, which I didn't knew before. That's one thing that I definitely need to look into. Yeah.
Recipes could be bicep. They could be Terraform. I think the interesting thing that we're trying to learn a little bit from the community on the recipe side and like what technologies people are interested in. I think our goal is to be somewhat unopinionated. Like if folks are using Terraform, which is something we heard when we started having conversations, so we added Terraform support. We've heard rumblings about things like Crossplane or Pulumi. I think we're looking for input and feedback on that. So we've enabled both Bicep and Terraform today, but the intention is that we would enable more as time goes on.
Yeah, I think that things like Pulumi and Crossplane and Terraform, right? I wouldn't say like Terraform that much, but like I would say that Pulumi and Crossplane, they really, really push so you can have like the right abstractions for your users to consume. And by adding recipes on top of that, you need to make sure that the interfaces remain the same so people can actually consume those. If you start, for example, like I saw the recipe and I thought, okay, we are now removing kind of like those interfaces that might be defined kind of like in a lower level, and that will like remove control, but also like remove the place where that interface actually, where you can plug implementations for those interfaces, and that got me really, really confused. At least from the demo that you showed, from a Kubernetes point of view, I will just say, this is super strange. Now we are just delegating the responsibility of the implementation of these recipes to a place that it's not clear where it belongs to.
So this is all a great conversation, but I am going to have to cut you short a little bit inside here. As the resources pointed out, let's go off, jump onto the Discord channel and do some things inside there, post some other questions inside the chat. But right now, maybe we'll have you back another time with some future into another demo on this. If kind of next year when you kind of maybe some things of purely want to show some other things inside that. But thanks to the demo, great stuff today. We're going to move on and bring up Elena and Cassie now. So Elena.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to start this off by showing off my Dapr swag. I'm sorry to break the pattern, but I'm still learning my Dapr swag. I'm relatively new in the community. As a matter of fact, this is my first presentation about Dapr. And I also love telling a good, good tech story, but this one is going to be actually relatively short. We're going to do, Cassie and I, my colleague and I, we're going to do a quick update on the state of errors in Dapr. So let's see. This should be relatively familiar to you if you have worked with Dapr, and I think that's a safe assumption in this forum. So we have errors like, we have some error codes in JSON, we have some gRPC code somewhere, but this is also a very common error code that you're going to see in many of the errors that the gRPC Dapr server is going to return. So what Cassie and I did in the past few weeks was taking this error from here to something like this. So with the proper gRPC code, with some more info, with a stable error code, and some more information about the error. So if we're talking about invalid key, because you cannot use these characters in a key name. So let's see, what was the key name? Specifically, you can easily programmatically access the key name instead of just having to parse some error message string that no one guarantees it's not going to change. Okay, so, and then just another example where maybe you can even get the help info URL leading you to the documentation where you can check out how to fix your error yourself. Okay, so this effort started with this proposal that was opened a while ago, accepted. It was basically suggesting that Dapr passes on from using the standard error model in gRPC to the richer error model. What does that mean? Well, we return a status message with the gRPC code, a string message, but we also add this little thing here, the details. And Cassie is going to tell us a little bit more about the details.
So yeah, elaborating on how we're enriching our status response. Like Elena said, we'll have, the gRPC code, the error message, but the nice thing is the error details. And I linked there, so you can click on that. But, well, you don't have to. On the right, I have listed out all the error details. We will have error info required, and I'll show what that looks like exactly. You can have things like the retry info or debug info. I won't go over the whole list here, but things like linking to Dapr docs pages is something that we can do, with a help link, error details. So just expanding on and using the richer error model and having that in a standardized way with the error details package is kind of what we're going for. We'll move to the next slide. And here is what that will look like. It's just a screenshot of me running a curl and a gRP curl. It's about the same thing. I am just publishing data to my fake Kafka. So that's what I'm doing there. And on the left is the HTTP output. So you'll see I'm piping it to JQ to have a prettier output. Thanks, Artur, for that tips and tricks. But you can see the details in a nice format where there's the error info as the type for the first type. And then I have resource info as well with the different attributes. And you can have things like the domain or metadata, and then things like the resource name or resource type, and just different attributes per error detail. And those will be added, in Dapr and component contrib to enrich the errors across Dapr for a better, user experience across all APIs eventually. And then, we have the error code. Oh, sorry. And and the error message. And basically it looks like the same for both, HTTP and gRPC. And then if you go to the next slide. So we did keep in mind the backwards compatibility. So you'll see that we had error code before, and we still do have error code. And of course, the error details will be expanded with, n number of details, but that's like an additional thing. So we are keeping in mind, not breaking our users, but enriching our error for them. On to the next. And then here is an example of what, from a user perspective, what this could look like from the Go SDK. So you can see the status.convert. So we're grabbing the status from the error. And then you can do, status.code, grab the code, and same like status.message and .details. And you could do like a switch case and do different logic based on different error details that come back. So this is kind of what it looks like in the state of things today. We have a draft PR open in Dapr right now. We'll be opening one in Kit, and then opening up GitHub issues per API, such that we can hopefully engage the community and get support and standardizing errors across Dapr for all of our APIs. So that's it from us. Thank you.
Thanks, that's fantastic, Cassie and Elena. So if people want to contribute to it all, will you be able to post where they can go and how they can contribute?
Yeah, it'll just be in the GitHub issues. We will be writing those and adding those very soon.
Yes, okay. Because I think that's improving the error codes across all of the APIs so they get more detailed error messages, something that we've had a long community ask over. And if we can show people how to kind of do a few of these and then contribute to others, it'll be amazing to kind of get more detailed error messages everywhere. Any questions on this that people want to ask? I see Whit says, very exciting, always great to have rich error messages. Yes, it is. All right, well, if there's anything posted in the chat window, other than that, Mark, you're up next.
All right, my screen is shared, I think.
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm very happy to announce that there will be a Dapr conference next year. It will be held on 21st of February. It'll be like a half a day conference. It will be like late in the day for Europe and early in the day for US. Here are the links. I will also share them now. Actually, here. Can I get to the chat? Yeah, I'll share them in the chat as well, so you can already register. But more importantly, for the people who are already here. We definitely need some call for papers. So there's a sessionized page here, the Dapr Day 2024. So we're definitely looking for all kinds of various topics, for instance, client case studies on how to run in production, or local development improvements, like building block deep dives, how to run multi-cloud with Dapr, or anything specific to like configuration for security and observability and resiliency.
How much?
So,
how long is the session going to be? Each one?
30-minute sessions, so not too long, but that does allow us to have some amount of speakers to present. So 30-minute sessions.
Okay.
So yeah, I definitely hope to see some CFPs from all of you who are attending now, and please share this message across.
When's the last day for the CFCs to be submitted by?
Was it the 3rd of January?
3rd of January. Okay, so people have until the 3rd of January.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you have some time, but yeah, please post them soon.
And if this is successful, we're hopefully going to do some more of these in the future as well. Yes. So this is the very first one of these. So this is exciting to see.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Looking forward to this. Yep. All right. Let's move on to the next one. Is the community show and tell. Quite a bit of information again this time. Just 2 blog posts, but the other content is making up for this. First, we have the Unlocking Scalability and Resilience Dapr on Kubernetes by Karan Singh. It's quite a detailed blog post. Still on an overview level, but a good read. And then there's one from Arka Prava Sinha, building microservices with Dapr and .NET, in this case about the workflow building block. Also it's actually more like a tutorial blog post. It's very long, very detailed. All right, but then there are actually a lot of videos posted lately on mostly on YouTube about Dapr. So this one is like a getting started on Dapr with .NET 8 and VS Code, very nice one. Another one with .NET 8 and Dapr. This one is in Vietnamese, by the way, so useful to know. Then we have one in French. Was recorded during a conference in the Alps. I think the slide reads how to make your architecture like future-proof with Dapr. There's one using the new images from our website. It's nice to see. And this one is in Spanish. And then we have one also using the new website visuals, and this one is in Russian. So it's nice to see that all over the world people are giving like Dapr sessions in this conference season. Then I also found someone mentioning the State of Dapr report and reviewing the State of Dapr. I mean, this was in Spanish, which I cannot speak, so I do need some help actually translating this. So, Salaboy, I will speak to you soon.
Let's do it.
And then we had the Azure Functions team talking about the Dapr extensions for functions in the community stand-up recently, so that was good to see. And I had one of my Dutch Azure MVPs, Edward van Wijk, talking about the Dapr workflow in Prague at the Update conference. We had someone doing like a Dapr workshop on Azure. And then we had Laurent mentioning Dapr and Aspire. He's doing quite some experiments with the combination of the two, so that's also good to see. I was in Vilnius, Lithuania recently to also give a Dapr workflow talk. And there was like .NET Core conference in Spain, also a couple of Azure MVPs doing like a comparison between Azure Double Functions and Dapr workflow. I definitely want to see this, although it's probably also in Spanish. We have Mark also gave a Dapr session on another developer conference. And we had some stuff on LinkedIn, like streams or videos also about Dapr, this time in German. And this was the last one, someone who attended, or actually did this today, a conference in Serbia about rapid development with Dapr. So there's really like a big boost on Dapr recently shared on socials. That's quite cool to see. Yeah, if you have stuff to share about Dapr, if you find something on socials, or if you have created something, please join the Dapr Discord and share it in the show and tell channel. I will also copy paste all of the links in there as well of the stuff I found. But it definitely makes my life easier if you help with sharing that as well. And well, if you manage to stay until the call until now, you definitely can claim this Holopin badge. This is the new community supporter badge that we will give away to anyone who is supporting Dapr. That was my update today, Mark.
Excellent. Great update. Actually, there's quite a lot happening across around the world in different communities. So with that, we have a little bit of time. If anyone has any questions that they want to ask, either on the project, about anything that's happened today, any of the sessions we've had. If there are, just kind of either open up on chat, or we can just, Andrew says the new summary is very nice. I find myself looking back at the YouTube videos for references and links. Yeah, it's great. Mark, you put a lot of time in finding these things and digging them out. That's what I'm saying. It always helps if people can post them a bit more on Discord and find them. But it's good to see all the activity around the world and all the different communities.
Yeah, I'll also include the links in the video description on YouTube later.
Yes. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, and thanks for all the presenters today. Great demo on Radius. Love the error codes that are happening inside Dapr, improving those. Don't forget to submit into the Dapr Day that we're going to have. I also just posted inside here, there's also attending App Developer Con in the EU. That's also happening as well. There's another event that you may also want to submit a talk into for Dapr. We always love to get as many Dapr submissions into these events as much as we can. And thanks everyone today. Thanks for our speakers, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.
Bye-bye.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.